When I was first trying to raise money for Softricity, right, in like
Yeah.
1999, I'll never forget this. I had a VC who said to me, Windows is a legacy operating system. It's going to go away. Everything's going to be HTML.
Welcome to this episode of Liquidware Chats. We are happy and pleased to have with us David Greschler. He's the CEO and founder of NomadGo. But we are having Mr. Greschler on because he's one of the original founders of the technology behind AppV, a company called Softricity. Welcome, David.
Hey, great to be here, Jason.
I appreciate you taking the opportunity to sit down with us and speak with us about where we are in the industry. You know, this past month, 2 weeks ago, AppV server is end of life now. The sequencer and the client are still around. So then they've said, and there was an end of life for that too, but they pulled it back and they said, no, we're going to keep the sequencer. We're going to keep the packager. That's Microsoft saying that, but AppV server is no longer going to be a thing. So customers are now kind of limited. They have a thing in AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop, called App Attach. And then there's some other players out there can fill the gap. Profile Unity can still assign AppV packages, but I really want to just let you speak about Softricity, how it came to be. I met you in approximately 2004 or 5, I think. I was doing some work for a software company based in the Netherlands, and we were Loose Alliance partners, and going to the Citrix shows back then. Citrix, I don't know, what do they call it? Synergy?
Well,
even then, iForm at first. I did one of the first of those too. And we got along well. I've got something that you haven't even seen in preview that you gave me, and it's still hanging in my closet. I have refused to throw this one out. Look at that.
Oh man, I love that. Right? I've got a few of those sitting in my closet too.
Look, I just pulled this out. It's and I have gone through my closet time and time again. I'm like, no, that's one I'm keeping. That is one I'm keeping. So
it's a high quality shirt.
Yeah, it's an Izod.
I know, it's really nice. Yeah. That's cool. That's awesome. I love that.
Been there, done that, got the shirt to prove it or something, I think.
Yeah, exactly. You know? Well, at least the moths haven't got to it, you know?
Right. And it is a high quality shirt. It's Izod.
Yeah, Izod. Yeah.
So, you know, I'm already speaking too much. I would like to hear, and I know the people would like to hear the beginnings of Softricity and how that technology came to be.
You bet. And, you know, it's funny you talk about the end of life, you know, because actually May 22nd of 20 years ago was when we announced that Microsoft had acquired us. So it's, you know, I consider it pretty good. Software doesn't last very long, and it's lasting less and less long these days. We'll get into that later. But, you know, living for 20 years, surviving, and, you know, still having functionality and still having a great ecosystem, you know, that's part of the company you're with and so on. You know, it's kind of nice to know that it's actually lasted this long. So that's pretty cool. So it all started in a museum, believe it or not. So I was the director of exhibits at the Computer Museum, which at the time was in Boston. But is now, you know, large scale in Silicon Valley. So if you actually a little promote it, because it's a great place to go. If you're into computers, it's terrific. And they built a beautiful location. I forget which city in Silicon Valley.
Well, we could probably put a link, you know, in these YouTube videos right up in the corner, and people could link to that.
Yeah, it's called the Computer History Museum now. But back then it was in Boston because, you know, at that time, the center of gravity of computing 30 years ago was really, a lot of it was in Boston before it moved to Silicon Valley. You know, folks like Digital and Wang and all that, those were the people who had the money and they could fund a museum. So anyway, I was the director of exhibits there, and we had a problem that we had to solve, which was we wanted to do an exhibit on kids software. And at that time, you know, they were on these like CDs and DVDs like Mist and things like that. And, you know, they were about 600 megs. And we had 50 pieces of software that we wanted our users, our visitors to use. Digital Computer, who eventually got bought by Compaq, I think, or
Right.
whoever. I don't know. That's the whole story. They donated hardware to us. And at that time, they gave us their latest and greatest, and it had hard drives that had 256 megabytes on them, because that's what you had.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we were struggling with the fact that we had 50 pieces of software, each about 600 megabytes, and how we're going to do it. They gave us 14 machines, right? So we naively said, hey, why don't we just put it on a big hard drive, and somehow we'll share that hard drive out to all these 14 machines. And that sounded good in theory.
Right.
It was, almost impossible to pull off. But we did, and that's a whole other story, but we did. And it was a hack, totally hacked it. Because Windows at that time had these color palettes, and then they would change the color format, and all the color would be, anyway, all these problems. And then the network, you had all these apps coming over. But the fundamental idea that you would have a centralized location for an app and that you would stream the code over to the client was what we sort of did. And so we did it. And it turned out people were spending hours in this one exhibit. Like, we had really cool exhibits that people would just like walk through in 5 minutes, but they would sit there and they would spend hours.
Oh, wow.
And so it was an interesting thing. And so that was 1998. And then another thing happened, which was around that time. The internet had kind of taken off in 96 with Mozilla and all that, or Netscape, I should say. And then, so the internet was really hot, and it was that same feeling of like, oh my God, the feeling we have today with AI. Back then, you might remember, it was just like, wow, this is unbelievable. And everybody was innovating like crazy. So at that time, Roadrunner, who eventually became Xfinity, Comcast and Xfinity, they came to visit us at the museum, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna start offering this thing called broadband internet." And I'm like, "How are you going to do it?" And they're like, "Well, you might not know it, but the cable that's going into people's house for cable is 10 megabits, and we think we can offer internet over 10 megabits instead of these modems." And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because this exhibit is using a 10 megabit network. And so it got me thinking, well, everybody at the time, by the way, was talking about, oh, Java, right? We're going to rewrite all our software in Java, right? That was like
there's a whole Java magazine and everything at the time.
It was insane, right? And I thought, well, wow, if you could stream software over the internet, like we were doing inside this exhibit, and you wouldn't have to rewrite your software, right? We didn't rewrite that kid software. It was just mist being run over at this local area network. So that was the kind of aha moment. And again, it's important to understand that at that time, there was all this incredible innovation going on, because no one had ever really thought about delivering anything over a large network, right? I mean, maybe you did it inside a LAN, but you didn't do it over the internet. And so like people were coming up with all kinds of things. Like, one of the things that influenced me was this product called Pointcast, which was this,
do you
remember Pointcast?
I do.
I love Pointcast.
I do.
And it was cool because it had this balance of centrally deploying but locally processing. You remember how it was like really interactive and vivid?
It made an active desktop. You just had a static desktop, but then you had this almost screensaver running that would feed you news and video or certain things like.
And you could click it, it would run right away. You didn't have to wait to
stock ticker was one of the first times you could see that. Live. Yeah, I remember that.
So anyway, that influenced me a lot. I saw that and I thought, oh my God, that's what we should be doing. So anyway, I eventually left the museum in 1999, and there were two other people I worked with at the museum. One was Stuart Schaefer, who ended up being one of my co-founders, still at Microsoft, by the way, and really the CTO of the company. You might have met him. I mean, just genius technical person, right? Genius. And another person at that time, Owen Mislevy, who we were working with as well. He ended up in the company for quite a while, but then he eventually left. But so the three of us sort of started working on this idea. And I remember like the first time we took, actually, Owen had a job at like at a university. And so he opened up a server there and he put like a piece of kids software there. And then I was in another location and we tried to stream it. And, we found all these problems with it, but like it was actually working. And so that was really the beginning. And, just kind of to get a sense of how it ended up being Softricity, we originally thought of it as, oh, this is a way that consumers could rent software. So the original name of the company was softwarewow.com.
Okay.
Remember,
Whose idea
this
was
is
that?
1999. That was
Yeah.
my idea. What we thought is, let's go do deals with all these portals that were out there at the time: Yahoo, Snap,
Yeah.
Excite, right, and all that. And
Prodigy might have still been around.
yeah, and actually ZDNet. And ZDNet ended up being our first customer, and they were like, "Yeah, this is a great idea because we have this download library, and our data shows that 70% of those downloads never actually make it in full and get turned on. So this would be great." So we worked with them, did all this stuff. We had it up and running. It was great. And then 2000 comes along and there's a massive stock market crash, as you can remember.
Right.
And so all these companies we were working with, they were like, yeah, we've changed our business model. We want you to pay us, X amount of money to have the privilege of being on our site.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, how are we going to make money?
Yeah.
But one of the things that came out of ZDNet was that somebody said to us, they're like, wow, this is a great idea. We could really, we would like to use this inside our company. And we were like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, yeah, well, today we walk around, they call it SneakerNet. We're walking around with these CDs and we're installing it. And oh, by the way, when we install, we discover that we break the other software that we install on, right? So there was this interesting kind of two problems that were out there. One was the problem of, installing, a centralized way to install. And the second was installing is really painful because it breaks the computer because of the operating system, people overriding it. There's no good best practices, blah, 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 all the stuff about. So at that time, we sort of said, maybe we should do a shift. By the way, just a small detail, but really important detail. We had just raised our B round at an insane, at that time, it was an insane valuation because it was right at the top of the .com era. So like we raised, it was like a pre of 45 million or something, which like we had like zero revenue, right? And so we had 12 million in the bank, and then we're like, do we just keep going on this business model that's not going to work, or do we become an enterprise play? And so we decided, yeah, it seems like, we did some market research, we talked to a lot of enterprises, and we heard that this pain around delivery and installation was universal, and that there were these armies of, regression testers like that would, whenever anything got released into a desktop, they'd have to test all the other software. That was a huge pain point. It meant they weren't agile, and also just having to walk around instead of pushing it. And we also heard about like stuff like MSI, but what we heard there was, yeah, there's software, or Landesk, right? There is software that pushes it all out, but again, that only had about a 70% success rate, and then it doesn't always work. So we realized, oh, this could be a really good market for us, and no one else was doing it. And so we changed the name. Like I was like thinking deeply, and then in the middle of the night, I woke up and I told my wife, I think I have the name, Softricity, software as electricity. And so she's like, okay, awesome. Just go back to sleep.
Go back to sleep.
I was excited.
Yeah.
So anyway, then we shifted, and Stuart played a really big role in re-architecting the whole thing to think of it as an enterprise offering. And how would we do that? We had to come up with a sequencer, right? Because we're like, well, this we're no longer doing the work. We're going to have other people do the work. So how do we do that? So we did that. And then we went through a lot of ups and downs, getting our first customers, but very quickly we saw that large enterprises, banks, all had this problem. At that time, then we also discovered one other thing, which was we had a guy come, Chad Jones. He had been working on ASPs. Like, remember that? Like what was that? I think
Yep.
it was called ASPs, right? Where they were like, oh, we'll take over all your compute for you.
Yep.
So he'd been working on that, and he'd been working on Citrix products. And he said, wow, this product would work really well with these Citrix servers, because it turns out people are like only able to put one app per server because of the problem of, configurations getting overwritten. He's like, this way they could run multiple apps on the same server and it wouldn't conflict with each other. So we're like, oh, that's cool. So we
Yep.
built a version for Citrix, and that's how we ended up at iForm. And it turned out that was the best path in. That ended up being like our initial way in. People were more interested in the Citrix product than the desktop product.
Right.
Because
It was called iForm in those years. It went from Thinnergy to iForm. Yeah. That was the one I couldn't think of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Before it was Synergy later. Right.
So anyway, so we that's kind of the background, and then of course.
So Citrix got really interested, from what I know firsthand, because I've had even seen you at one of those, maybe the 2005 conference or whatever. And there was some other people that got really interested. Other companies started getting really interested in Softricity.
Yes.
And you guys were growing and had customers. What were your typical customers? You said banks, but what was another? Was it hospitals yet, or healthcare?
Hospitals. Yeah. Oh God, there's
anything that overlap with Citrix, right? And, that's the way we are too, still to this day. So our biggest markets are healthcare, financial services, and the federal government. So it's unsurprisingly, it hasn't changed a whole lot. Those are the ones that resonate the most. I
think, and again, I've been out of the industry for a while. I'm working on something else now, but I think a lot of those, need a Citrix type model because they need to retain the data centrally, right? And so it makes sense that that's probably why we have great traction there first as well, because we were, helping improve that situation with the Citrix products. And we were trying to push the desktop, but that was a bit of more of a leap, but eventually we did get there by the end, where people were putting it on the desktop as well.
So Citrix liked it so much, though, that they wanted their own thing, right? Or they wanted you guys. I remember that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We went through a number of different times, talking to them about acquisition and things along those lines. And eventually Microsoft also saw the value.
Yeah.
And especially,
Citrix launched something called Citrix App Streaming that they later pulled the plug on after a few years, a couple of years, 2 or 3. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great. And it's an interesting thing, because
because once you guys went to Microsoft, it became a default. It really became the default standard, right?
Oh yeah.
So that was 2006, May 22nd, 2006. You say?
Was wow. The 20 is going to be the 20-year anniversary of the acquisition. So yeah.
Well, maybe we'll drop this on that date.
Oh yeah, that'd be fun to do. You should do it.
Right.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah. 20th. But and then I think it's kind of interesting because when it got to Microsoft, I mean, as you might remember, the way they built the business model was you had to buy
the desktop optimization
pack, right? But you had to buy the what was it called? The sort of the annual subscription.
SA, yeah.
Yeah, and this was sort of like the treat.
The desktop optimization pack was still relevant until just recently.
Really?
Believe it or not. Yeah. I don't think it's called that anymore, or it's drastically changed. Yeah. Because because I had left that Dutch software company, and I was with a company that had a product called Script Start, and we were competing with Script Logic and the desktop standard during that time. Yeah. And the same time they rolled you guys together with the acquisition into what they called the desktop optimization pack. Within months or whatever, they had bought the desktop standard and rolled that in, and that was a policy management engine that later became group policy preferences or group policies, and we competed with that Script Start. And fun fact, that product that I was involved with later became Profile Unity, which later became part of Liquidware, and that we still sell successfully to this day. But that's how I knew when that happened. That's how I can vividly remember it. I didn't track as much Softricity at the time in AppV, but it affected us too at the time, because it's like all of a sudden this is going to be standard. If you're on SA,
Yeah.
every customer will get it, which was great for the acquisition and what Microsoft had done for you guys. But it really had a ripple effect in the market, because there was a couple other players. That's probably at the time Citrix probably abandoned theirs, and some of the other there was a couple others in the market, I think. But very interesting times around
It was.
2008. Yeah.
Yeah, that whole
2007.
thing,
Yeah.
well, the acquisition 2006, yeah, yeah, because I think, and there was machine virtualization that was going on, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that was a big battle. You had VMware going on. Then I ended up at Microsoft and we rolled out, as part of the rollout for Hyper-V.
Right. Well, tell me about your role there, because you joined
Yeah.
Microsoft as part of the acquisition, and was that V still like under you to help manage, or?
So, I mean, I kind of had to invent my role there a little bit. It was very interesting. They kind of like
Nice.
let me figure it out. And what happened is I realized, oh, Microsoft had all these interesting kind of under the umbrella of virtualization, which was really, pre-cloud, right? I mean, the agility of virtualization, the ability to dynamically, move workloads or operating systems around is really what we do in the
Yep.
cloud today, right? But it was like the beginning of that. And it is still today is kind of the foundation of a lot of the cloud processes that are out there. So what I realized was, wow, Microsoft, maybe it needed that outside review, but like you've got, remote desktop, working with Citrix, right? You've got this, App V now. You've got, Hyper-V, which was coming out, and so what we did was I was like, we need to turn this into one story, because I think, we need to get IT people to realize virtualization of all these different layers can play together, and that and it's going to give you this on-demand agility that you've never had before. So it was like we were trying to like get the big picture out there. It was also a defensive strategy, or you might say offensive strategy, against VMware, because VMware had a little bit of these pieces. I mean, I think they ended up buying like an App B competitor.
They had a thin app. They had a thin app product called Thin App for a while. That was kind of a head-to-head thing, a little bit different, but yeah. And I think it's still maybe out there. And now they've got App Volumes, which is similar to our FlexApp, but we're, we run across every desktop. They claim to, but we run across physical, virtual, cloud, and we're a little more broad than that. But yep, you're remembering it correctly.
So yeah, so that was that's where I really ended up focusing, was like kind of how can we make this a big picture story, and tell the whole thing, and kind of convince people, well, you should go the Microsoft way because we've got it all integrated. And we also had the managers, and there was System Center that was managing stuff, and there was on the I forget the name of the app that was like a P to physical to digital conversion, and all these things. Anyway, so yeah, that's where I spent a lot of my time. And then, it was just right around when the cloud was happening. Then it was an interesting way to kind of go, oh, hey, this fits right into where you want to go. And that's when Azure was beginning to roll out and things along those lines. So yeah, so it was fun. I stayed there 5 years, great time. But I'm kind of a startup guy, I guess.
Did you ever look at the problem you're solving with applications, Windows applications, even when you're there in the last few years you're with Microsoft, and say, well, what sort of runway do we really think we have with Windows apps? Because tablets started coming on board and everything else. And for a while there, they thought everything computing would all happen on the tablet infrastructure or phones, right?
When I was first trying to raise money for Softricity, right? In like 1999. I'll never forget this. I had a VC who said to me, wow, Windows is a legacy operating system. It's going to go away. Everything's going to be HTML. So I'll never forget. He also said, oh yeah, we just made a great investment in PetSmart, which of course you could, they were like the poster child of.
Yeah, .com, right?
But in a way, he was wrong. Obviously, it was like the greatest time for Microsoft because everybody wanted to get on the internet, so they bought a bunch of Windows machines. Like think about the growth there. But like now, let's look at the situation now, right? And especially with AI coming, do people write specific apps? I mean, I guess they still do. I'm not in this. I'm not in this.
Well, it's what we found, and so I asked myself this question back in maybe 2012 or 13 with Liquidware, and I was like, how long do we think we have? Maybe till 2019, and then it's not done nothing but grow. And the difficulty is that the legacy apps, to get off of those, that corporations really can't get off of them. And when you look at design and CAD CAM and all those. And then you're looking at jet manufacturers that we have as customers that they have these jets roll in, and they have now decades of jets that they're under contract to maintain. And they're like, which CAD CAM version was this one built in? And they literally have gone to more modern delivery of this, because the prior solution would have been to maintain a bunch of desktops or laptops with all those individual versions of CAD CAM on them. Let's roll that one over, a laptop over to the jet, and now let's work on that. So this has solved a lot of things still in modern time of desktop computing, and again, healthcare, and they're still using Epic. And there's a more modern version of Epic, but it still has dependencies on software and financial services. The insurance industry, banks, and all those still have hundreds of apps. I read a story the other day that the average Windows enterprise has over 350 unique apps still.
I'm not surprised. Well, Mark Templeton, right, who's turned out to be a great friend and a great mentor for me with NomadGo. I'll never forget, he gave a talk at, I think it was iForum or Synergy or whatever, and he called it the archaeology of computing. Yeah. And he's totally right. He talked about, he goes, everybody talks about the latest stuff, but you walk into these data centers, you walk into these places, and you see what you're describing, right? Which is like, we're not going to change the software. It's got too much in it, and it's, right. And we have to run our business. And, so, people love to talk about, oh yeah, everything's going away, it's all going to get rewritten. The reality of it, right? I mean, someone who's you talk about the jet engines. I mean, they're not going to take the risk of rewriting it for some jet engine that they have to support that's 20 years old, right?
And you would think that these are edge use cases. There's more and more than you would think that are still out there that are Windows apps are still very, very important. So we gave you a preview and a video of FlexApp. Were you a little surprised it's solving things a little bit differently, but still doing
but it's so much nice. It's so clean where you just click, and you're there. Boom, boom, boom. I mean, it's great to see it. I mean, it's just so impressive.
Folks at home, we'll put a link up here for FlexApp 1. So we even containerized it to where we have everything on a single executable. And if I were to give you any app that's been done this way as an executable, I could get it to you by any means. We can even do it by Microsoft Intune, and you double click on it and you can run. It'll run. And so there's been similar technologies in the past, but this is the modern way to do it because it's not isolated, and so it looks native to the OS. But as of this week, we actually have customers asking us, because App V is legacy now, clearly, and part of its end of life. We have an isolated mode too, and it's built on a new technology that came out in Windows 11. It's Windows Sandbox. So this is when the Windows 11 operating system for professional and higher includes a mode to run another Windows OS in a sandbox for testing purposes and things like that. So we've taken that new technology and we have taken our FlexApp, which is still gains that high compatibility level. And if you want something fully isolated, it will launch in what we're calling FlexApp Sandbox mode. And we've got demos online, and we did a recent webinar on it too. So if people want to see it, they can look that up. But it stays separate from the underlying OS, and then we can run side-by-side apps even. I said we were so native, we look native to the OS, but this new technology, even isolation, is still important to many customers. Yeah. Like you said earlier, you're an entrepreneur at heart, a startup, and even beyond that at heart. So what are you up to now at NomadGo?
Yeah. So a NomadGo is really, it's been about a 10-year effort, but really it was about computer vision. And I looked into computer vision 10 years ago with my co-founder, Jonah Friedel, and we, first thought, wow, this is crazy. You're replacing the eyes. There's a lot of applications out there. So we looked at that. Interestingly, there's a couple kind of comparisons to Softricity. One thing we realized really quickly was that computer vision at that time was sending all the inference to the cloud. And when we did a couple projects, we realized there is no way you could ever run a profitable business if you're sending 30 frames a second to the cloud to be inferred. all the AI companies are learning this today, but we figured that out quite a while ago. So our first thing we worked on was how do we use processing power of the device where that's collecting the information to be able to do the inference and then just send the results up. And so we were working with iPhones and iPads, and we realized, they have GPUs, CPUs, neural engines. Yeah, they're like a data center in your pocket. So the first innovation we did was how can we do everything, all the inference on device? And that was the beginning of where we worked. Secondly, we then started looking for like, well, who's going to pay us to, what kind of applications? And we went through a lot of things, went through COVID, doing, like counting people, all this stuff, but none of it really generated data that people super cared about until we uncovered that people count inventory manually.
Mm-hmm.
So inventory in restaurants, inventory in retail, inventory in healthcare, inventory in, everybody has inventory, and it's the most analog process still today. 99.9% of inventory is counted manually, even with a barcode. They might barcode it. You'll see that in a grocery store, but then
you see the tag hanging there. Someone's been counting it and marked it off. Please do not touch this little sheet, right? Or whatever it says. Yeah.
So it is a huge problem, and it has massive economic implications, because if you get it wrong, you're either undercounting, and now you don't have customer comes in, they don't have the product, and so you just lost revenue. Or if they overcount, you've got waste, and especially in the food industry, that's big. So we've been, so we realized, oh, okay, this is data that matters. We're replacing a manual process that feeds into a very important process, ordering, that we can digitize. And so we've built a solution that effectively understands the world in 3D, because we also discovered that computer vision wasn't enough. Because, if you go and there's cans of tomatoes, you can't see the cans of tomatoes behind the first one, especially if so we actually combine a lot of the sensors that are on an iOS device, LiDAR, the accelerometer. There's so much great stuff on those devices.
Oh, wow.
And so we take advantage of all of them to effectively understand the world in 3D. We're creating in real-time 3D digital twin. And, if you go to our website, it's nomad-go.com. You can see videos of it.
Well, that's great. So stores can use it. Restaurants that want to check stock, just make sure they've got everything. They can just take their own phone or whatever, or the tablet, and they go into the stock room and they look around.
Yeah, but generally what we found is the company buys the phone, and because there's a
purpose. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very purpose, and they'll use it for other applications as well, but it's usually the company owned, because that's data that's actually very important data, right? And it's actually sort of highly secure. If you think about at scale, understanding companies' inventory, that tells you about how their business is doing. So, so that's what I've been on. But what's interesting about it, when I was thinking about, some of these new products you guys are coming out with, one of the things that we've done recently is, originally we would use the traditional way of building a computer vision model. Let's say we had to count a can of tomatoes, right? So traditionally we would videotape it from different angles, then send it and get it annotated, and then take those annotations, build a computer vision model, test it, find out that it's not working quite right, and do more videos. So anyway, so that was a big gating factor for us to deploy to these companies, because we'd have to do all this work and all that. But what we've realized is, like, we have to crack the code on that. So not unlike the sequencer or some of the stuff you showed me, we've now got this new product, we call it instant onboarding, where we have figured out a way with very little data, mostly just information about the SKU, and then of course leveraging LLMs, to be able to instantaneously go from adding a product to being able to scan. And so it kind of reminds me, when I used that, I saw the video that you gave me, I was like, yeah, because you've obviously shrunk the experience way down from when we were doing Softricity with sequencing, and you had to do all these, it's really complicated. So it's like, it kind of reminded me. So, like, but that's what computing and innovation is always about, right? Making it easier, making it faster, making it, better for people to deploy. I mean,
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah. So that's what I've been working on. And yeah,
we'll
it's
make
a
sure
lot
we
of
put
fun.
links up here when we bring it up and everything. There
Yeah.
will already been a link. We'll put another one up top here so everybody can check it out, see what you're up to. And that sounds
Yeah.
like a promising technology. It's really solving a real world need.
Oh yeah. It's really yeah. It's just it's not unlike when we were calling around. We found out people were doing sneaker net, right? It was
Right.
highly manual. So that's the game.
Awesome.
Anyway, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today and sitting down at this 20-year anniversary of the Microsoft acquisition. And then it really, in a way, puts bookends on where AppV is. And even before that, the backstory. I know the viewers will be surprised. Some of them not even born yet, probably, when at least some of the stories we were talking about at the beginning.
And that's true.
But we're glad to share them, and it's so good to have David Greschler here with us with NomadGo, formerly of Microsoft, some other areas, and then Softricity to tell that story. And we'd like to thank our audience for watching. David, thanks for joining us today. And
Jason, it's been a pleasure, and I'm really glad that Liquidware is kind of continuing the idea, because it's like we said, right? It doesn't go away. These problems do not go away. And you guys are absolutely like solving it. I mean, it's so cool to watch how you guys are making it so simple now to deploy these apps,
Thanks.
It's perfect. Yeah.
And that wraps up this Liquidware chat. Thanks for watching.